Morning, everybody, and welcome back. I trust you've had a great weekend and you've been really blessed this weekend with your families and as you met and worshiped God together. And this morning, we're just going to be carrying on looking at the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is teaching his disciples what it means to be disciples in this world and how to live as disciples in this world. And we're carrying on this message of discipleship. And at the moment, we're busy looking through the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus in this passage is looking at from Matthew chapter 5 verse 21 onwards, to chapter 6, we're looking at what it means to be a disciple. And Jesus is looking at some of the commandments and he's expanding on that and just explaining to his disciples how it goes further than just obeying the commandments, but it actually goes to the heart issues behind what those commandments are. And that actually we've got to change our hearts and our minds and our thinking in those areas in order to live these commandments the way that God desires for us and to be his disciples in this world. And he says in Matthew chapter 5 verse 20, he says, "For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." And he's saying that actually as disciples of Jesus, the scribes and Pharisees were really religious leaders. They knew the law of God. They lived the law of God. But he's saying that our righteousness needs to surpass theirs. It needs to be better than these. And that means we need to follow Jesus. And we need to get to the heart issue of what these commandments are. Not just so that we just live and follow the end result and not do what the end result is, but that we don't do what even leads up to committing these acts. And that actually the thinking behind them is as bad as committing these acts themselves. And Jesus is looking here, and we're looking at Matthew chapter 5 verse 27 to 30 today, and he says this: "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." And what Jesus is really teaching here is teaching us how to surpass the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. And he's talking about here not to commit adultery. And he's the first thing he tells us that actually it's not just a physical act of going out and having an adulterous relationship with someone else, but even the thought of having that adulterous relationship is the same as committing it. And then he goes a step further and he says, what causes us to have that thought of an adulterous relationship and to think about someone in that way? And he's saying it is the lust of our eye. And what happens is that we look at people. And what is the lust of the eye that he's talking about here? He's talking about when we look at people and we desire to have, and we think about them in that sexual way and desire to have them and think about them in our mind of having them sexually. And that's what he's talking about, of the lust of the eye here. And what Jesus is saying here, he goes on and he makes the statement that if you have this lust of your eye, that it's better to take out your eye and throw it away and then be thrown into the fire of hell. And then he goes on, he says that rather than committing sin, if your right hand causes you to commit sin, rather chop it off and throw it into the fire than go to hell. And what he's saying here is like, we might look at that and we might be like, that's really drastic. Seriously, that's quite a drastic way of dealing with things. Isn't he being a little bit over dramatic? And he's not necessarily talking about physical chucking out of your eye, but what he's saying is that the result and the consequence of the sin that he tells us here is this: that we will be thrown into hell as a result of the consequence of the sin if we live in it. And he is saying that in order to get rid of the sin, we need to take drastic measures. We need to get serious about it, and we need to remove anything from our lives that causes us to sin in this way. And the reason why he tells us this is because sin, and the sin is deadly. And the consequence of the sin is deadly. And the reason why so many of us fall into the sin is because we haven't taken the time to ponder the consequence of it and what it plays and the result of it eternally in our lives and our relationship with God. Why are so many young men, or so many men and women, trapped in the struggle of pornography? Because the lust of their eye desires that that enjoyment and that satisfaction in the flesh that they might receive from it, but at the same time, they do not ponder the consequence of what it will play for them in eternity. And if you're trapped in that lustful thinking, in that fleshly way of thinking, that mindset, that actually the consequences in eternity without God, it's an eternity in hell. And that's the seriousness of it. And Jesus is saying here in order to be a disciple of me and not to think in this way, become drastic in the measures you take so that you can enjoy eternity with me and not experience the consequence of the sin in your life. And for some of us, this is a real challenge. How do we deal with this? What drastic steps do we need to take in order that we don't fall into this trap of lusting after others with our eyes and with our thoughts and with our thinking? And Jesus is saying, take those drastic measures. So for you, if you know that watching TV in an evening causes you to go onto that channel where there's, you're viewing things that causes you to think about other people in a lustful way, don't turn on that TV. Simple as that. Get rid of that TV. Rather take that time that you spend watching TV, rather spend it reading God's Word and building something positive into your life than something that's going to cause you to sin and cause you to fall. And we all know those awkward situations as men. I don't know why, if you're a man and you walk into any any clothes shop and you go to the changing room department where you're waiting for your wife, the area that's standing right next to you is that lingerie department. And it can be the most awkward thing. You're standing there, you're waiting for your wife to try on clothes, and you're right in the middle of the lingerie department, and all around you are women busy looking at different lingerie. And for how many men does that become a downfall in a lustful situation, because they look at all these other women looking at this underwear, and what do so many men's minds almost naturally start to think? They start to imagine those women in that lingerie, and that then results in other thoughts and other ways of thinking that is ungodly and unbiblical and not fit for a disciple of Jesus. And the consequence of that thinking then has eternal ramifications. So as men, that is an awkward situation for us. So what do we need to do? We need to remove us from that place and tell our wife, you go try on those clothes in that area. We're just going to go wait in the men's area. You come find us when you finish. If you really want me to see what you look like in it, take a picture of yourself in it and show me. Or ask me to come into the change room with you. But don't leave me standing outside the door where I might be led into temptation. And Jesus is saying, take drastic consequences to remove yourself from those situations that might cause your eye to lust, which is just as bad as committing adultery itself. And that's my challenge for us this week, is remove anything from your life that is causing you to lust and causing you to commit adultery with your mind, which is as bad as committing adultery in your flesh, because it is not worth your eternity, because God desires eternity with you, and this has eternal consequences of death. That's my challenge to you this week. Please join us tomorrow as we look at what it means to, as a disciple, what it means to view divorce and the effect of divorce in the life of the disciple, and what our mindset should be on that. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.